why does the rate of muscle gain slow down over time? That's the question we're going to be answering today. So you can see over time, the amount of muscle we gain slows down from nice fast beginner newbie gains right the way down to these slow gains we have in the next years of our training, these diminished returns. And we're going to talk all about how this is brought on by muscle protein synthesis and the effect of having more muscle over time, meaning it's harder to build new muscle. So we have our muscle protein synthesis and our muscle protein breakdown for the day that will create our net protein balance. Obviously, if we synthesize more protein than we break down, we'll be net positive. If we break down more than we synthesize, it will be net negative. So either we'll be anabolic or we'll be catabolic. So in most cases, we're always going to be anabolic. We're always going to be synthesizing more protein than we break down, unless we're under eating protein or we're in a really big calorie deficit and our body has to break down protein to create more energy. So let's imagine we are net protein positive, X amount of grams. We're a certain amount of grams. We've synthesized as much as we can. We've broken down all that we have and we're left over with whatever we're left over. This is going to go towards maintaining the current muscle tissue we have on our body. So we already have muscle on our body. We're going to build that back first. We're not going to lose that away. We need to maintain the muscle we have first. So when we take the net protein we've accumulated, we take away the amount it requires us to maintain what we already have, the leftover is how much muscle protein synthesis go towards to creating new muscle tissue. So if we start off and we're small and we're new to the gym, we have less muscle to maintain. So the portion of that muscle protein synthesis that will be spent on maintaining our tissue will be much smaller, and the portion we can go towards creating that new tissue, which I'm going to say is this blue part here on this pie chart, new tissue is in blue, will be much larger. So when we're new to the gym, we'll have a much larger and a much bigger slice of that muscle protein synthesis that can go towards new tissue. And as we get that new tissue, more and more of that muscle protein that we synthesize will go towards maintaining what we've already built. So if we start off at the gym and we're new to the gym, we might be the complete opposite way around, where we only need to spend a very small amount of the muscle protein synthesis that we've netted, take away when we're net protein positive, it might only require a small percent of what we have to maintain what we already have built on our bodies, and we'll have loads left over to build new tissue. But as we get more experienced in the gym, we'll be spending more of that protein on maintaining what we already have, and we'll have less to build new tissue. So it's almost like over time, even though we're maintaining that same amount of muscle protein synthesis, more of it is being spent on keeping what we've built, and less of it can be spent on building something new. So unfortunately, we run into another problem with diminishing returns, not only from the fact we spend more of the protein we synthesize on maintaining what we have, but also from the fact that the myonuclei only has a finite domain of growth. So there's only a small amount of what's called a myonuclear domain, which each muscle fiber can control and grow. And once it's reached its limit, it's maxed out. That's it. It can only control a certain area before satellite cells have to donate new nuclei to be able to have a larger area for growth. And that process takes more time than growing what already exists, as opposed to donating more to then create more to grow. So in terms of a hypertrophy standpoint, these myonuclei can grow quite quickly in the start, and then after prolonged periods of resistance exercise training, they require these new nuclei to go in, which is a slower process than them growing on their own. So for hypertrophy, that's the way it goes. And then you might think, oh, we could have hyperplasia and increase the number of these myonuclei and then have those grow from a smaller standpoint. But hyperplasia isn't really seen in humans, especially in the studies that I've looked at. Hyperplasia seems like something we can definitely get in some mammals under some certain conditions, but it doesn't seem like it's replicatable in people yet. So for the hypertrophy sort of thing, the cellular reasoning, that's why we get diminished returns from that standpoint as well, unfortunately. So unfortunately, from that protein budget standpoint, even if we maximize the amount of muscle protein that we can synthesize, and we go from 100% of that going towards new tissue, and then 90% to new tissue, 10% to maintaining, so on and so forth. The more experience, the more advanced we become, the larger our muscles get, the more is being spent on maintaining, the less is being spent on new growth, until there's this point where you're really experienced in your training. You might only be able to build a very small amount of new tissue, and all of that muscle protein that you're synthesizing, all of that training, all of that eating is just going towards maintaining what you have, unless you can improve the amount of muscle protein that you can synthesize in a day. And that would have to be by a significant amount to return back to the sort of progress you'd be making as a beginner or as a newbie. So over time, diminished returns, unfortunately. So it's not a case of lie down and cry about it and realize that you'll never be able to grow indefinitely, linearly, constantly, to the point of just becoming a walking gorilla. Small gains are not a failure. They are part and parcel of training. Diminished returns, going from those newbie gains where in your first year of training you can gain 10 kilos, 20 kilos. You hear all these crazy stories about how people started at one weight, maybe when they were young and they were a teenager, and they sort of went through puberty and they went through those newbie gains at the same time, and they blew up in size in those earlier years, formative years of their life. You see it all the time, guys in their 30s and 40s who've done crazy first year transformations in the gym when they've started lifting, or maybe people who were more trained when they were younger, and then when they're older in middle age, they've done a year in the gym and they've had these sort of crazy gains as that muscle memory has helped them get back to where they were back in the day. And it looks like over a year they've made like a decade's worth of progress, and it's all of these crazy things. And then guys who have been training for 2 to 3 years can't really even touch the sides of what they did in their first year. And then in their next 4 years, that fourth year, that fifth year, on and on and on, they're barely able to make up what they did. They're not even close to what they did in that first year, that second year, that third year. Over time, it gets less and less and less. And it sometimes goes to the point where people who have been training 10 years, 20 years, for decades at a time, in 1 year, all they're really able to do is go up a little bit of weight, down a little bit of body fat, improve some lifts, improve some aspect of their training, but by a very marginal amount compared to what they could have done earlier on. That is not a bad thing, because if you think about it, a bit like compound interest, this is like the complete opposite, essentially, of compound interest, where you start off with a slow rate of return, and then eventually you reap all the rewards, and you become a millionaire from compound interest investing, that sort of thing. This is almost like you get all of those returns up at the start, and you're buzzing and you're going crazy, and you're like, oh my god, I'm growing, I'm insane, and then that just slows down. So that's almost like the sucky part of it, that you sort of lose a bit of that motivation. You start seeing less and less changes, you start making less and less jumps in weight and lift. But in that sort of return compound, over time, those small changes, those small incremental gains make a much bigger difference than you think. Because if you go from being a certain size and a certain body fat, and you just sort of tweak those numbers slightly, and you get a little bit leaner, you end up looking a lot better. And it's almost like a lot of people see the sort of that year 5 to 6 or that year 7 to 8, people are like, wow, this guy in 1 year made massive difference in his physique. He must have changed something, he must have done something. But sometimes it's just a case of they've already built all of that tissue, they've already built that physique, and then they've just sort of changed the way they present it. Either they've lowered their body fat, or they've filled out a bit more and they're no longer cutting. And you can see those sort of payoff, those dividends of training for all that time appear a bit later. If you're never really been super lean and you've been training for 5 or 6 years, and then you cut down in your 7th year, you might all of a sudden look like you've made loads of progress, but you've actually just dropped the body fat and sort of revealed what was always hidden. Or maybe you've always been quite cut, you've always been quite lean, and then in a year you sort of decide to fluff out a bit, and all of a sudden all of those muscles are full and glycogenated, and it looks like these sort of windows where you've made big jumps of progress later in your training life. People say, oh, that's not possible because of this diminished return sort of thing, but it is sort of possible to get quick visual changes, quick changes in strength when we go from cutting to gaining, or from gaining to cutting. So if you lose a bunch of weight, it can look like a massive difference in your physique, even though your total sort of fat-free mass and the amount of muscle you have hasn't changed much. Vice versa, if you go from cutting to gaining, your scale weight can go up drastically because you fill out with water and glycogen, Your fat-free mass might not have changed that much, but you still look drastically different, much bigger. So you can go from looking sort of like fluffy and big to all of a sudden be like lean and big, and that looks like a huge change. And you can go from being very flat and cut to being very full and cut, and all of a sudden that's a massive change. So keep that in mind. If you feel like, oh my God, my progress is stalling and I'll never look good, you definitely will. It's just inevitable. If you train properly, you eat hard, you do everything right, diminished returns or not, they all still pay off, they all still add off. You know, those first 10 kilos are going to improve your physique only so much. The next 5 kilos are going to improve it even more. And it's compound interest that way. The more you add on top of, even though it's easier in the beginning, sure, the more later on down the line gains is when you really start to see the massive improvements. If you go from 60 kilos to 70 kilos, you might not look like you lift, but if you go from 90 kilos to 91, you'll have definitely look big at 90. You'll look a whole lot bigger at 91 because of the way that tissue will sit on your frame when you're nice and lean. So just bear that in mind. There is always hope. Don't worry about it. So guys, I hope I haven't prattled on too much there about the diminished returns we get from training over time as we go from beginner to intermediate to advanced. But in the next video, we'll break that down. We'll talk about how to maximize the muscle protein synthesis. How can we do more, get more out of the food that we eat, the work that we put in? How can we actually elevate that amount and continue to make a little bit more progress a little bit quicker for a little bit longer? But if you like this video, drop us a like, a comment, don't forget to subscribe, share it around. Let me know sort of how your progress went in the beginning, how it is now, how much you expected to gain in your first year, how much you're gaining now in that 5th year. So yeah, drop us a comment. Let me know if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one when we talk about how to maximize muscle protein synthesis. Take care.